Most people live trying to be understood, trying to explain their pain, their choices, their truth, believing that validation will bring peace. But the unconscious does not heal through explanation, it heals through integration. When we are constantly explaining ourselves, we are often unconsciously trying to escape the discomfort of being misunderstood. Yet, the real transformation begins the moment we stop performing for the outer world and turn inward. In silence, we begin to confront the parts of ourselves we abandoned to be accepted. And in choosing ourselves without explanation, we begin to reclaim our wholeness. There is a reason you feel so exhausted after explaining yourself. It's not merely the effort of putting thoughts into words. It's the invisible weight of defending your right to be as you are. Somewhere deep within you, perhaps since childhood, there was a moment when you first felt unseen. A moment when your truth was not received, when your feelings were denied, or when your voice was too much or not enough. In that moment, a fracture occurred, and from that point forward, your psyche began to develop a silent strategy. If I can just explain myself well enough, they will see me. If I can justify why I am the way I am, maybe then they will stay. Maybe then I will finally be safe. But the soul does not heal through explanation. The soul heals through being. And when you explain yourself out of fear of being misunderstood, you unknowingly betray something sacred inside you. The silent truth that doesn't need to be proven to anyone. So many carry within them the burden of this wound, the fear that without explanation they will be judged, abandoned, or unloved. This fear whispers, you must be clear, you must be agreeable, you must make them understand. But the more you try to explain, the more you shrink, because you begin to edit your truth to make it palatable. You begin to package your authenticity into something someone else might accept. And in doing so, you drift further from yourself. You must understand this. Explaining is not the problem. It is the need to explain, the compulsion that comes from a place of pain, that holds you back. When you explain from clarity, it can be connection. When you explain from fear, it becomes a cry for permission. And healing cannot begin while you are still asking others for permission to be yourself. At the core of this behavior lies a psychological pattern, an unconscious belief that love must be earned, that your essence must be translated into terms others are comfortable with. But your soul is not a language others must learn. It is a presence, and presence does not need to be understood to be valid. It needs to be honored. Every time you try to make someone see you, hear you, or believe you, someone who has already chosen not to, you are abandoning yourself. Not because you are wrong, but because you are investing your energy in something that cannot nourish you. The child within you still believes that love is conditional, that to be loved, you must be comprehensible, agreeable, acceptable. And this child is afraid that silence means rejection, but it does not. Silence, when it is chosen with awareness, becomes sacred. It becomes the first act of self-reclamation. You are not here to explain yourself into someone else's understanding. You are here to become whole, and wholeness does not ask for validation. It requires integration. It asks you to gather all the pieces of yourself that you've tried to edit, to justify, or to tone down, and welcome them home without apology. When you stop explaining, something remarkable happens. You begin to listen to yourself. You begin to feel what you actually need, beyond the noise of expectations. You begin to ask, is this worth my peace? And often the answer is no. It is not worth the draining effort to convince someone of your goodness, your truth, or your right to feel what you feel. There is a deeper intelligence in you that knows this. That knows healing begins the moment you no longer try to manage how others perceive you. That knows freedom lives on the other side of not needing to be understood. And it takes great courage to stop explaining, to let someone misunderstand you, to let someone walk away, and to stay rooted in yourself anyway. This is not coldness. This is not withdrawal. This is maturity. It is the realization that the people who are meant to walk beside you will not need to be convinced. They will not require a presentation. They will feel your truth, and those who don't, let them go. Let them walk their own path. That is not your concern. Your concern is the quiet inner alignment that arises when you finally say to yourself, I no longer need to justify who I am. I choose me. That is the moment healing begins. There is something profound that happens when you stop speaking, not out of fear, not out of defeat, but as an act of presence. In the stillness that follows, you begin to sense another layer of yourself. Not the one others see, not the one you've carefully constructed in response to the world's expectations, but the one that has always been there, just beneath the noise. The one who doesn't argue, doesn't justify, doesn't seek approval. The one who simply is. When you are silent, truly silent, you begin to feel what words often cover up, the restless need to explain, the anxiety of being misunderstood, the hope that someone will say, yes, now I understand you, as if that alone would finally allow you to rest. But silence does not wait for anyone's understanding. It invites you into your own. There are truths inside you that cannot be spoken, not because they are secret, but because they are too vast, too deep, too sacred for language. When you keep trying to articulate your pain, your worth, or your essence, you start to reduce yourself to what can be grasped by the mind. But you are not a concept to be understood. You are a presence to be felt. And silence is the only space wide enough to hold the fullness of who you are. People fear silence because it feels like emptiness, but it is not empty. It is full of everything you've been avoiding. When you sit in silence long enough, you meet yourself without the costume of words. You hear the echo of your own breath. You feel the tremors of your unspoken sorrow. You sense the pulse of something timeless within you, something that does not need to be explained to exist. The compulsion to speak, to explain, to fill the void, is often a defense against this sacred encounter. When you talk, you manage perception. You shape how others see you. You control. But when you are silent, you surrender that control. And in surrender, you begin to heal, not because someone else understands you, but because you finally allow yourself to be as you are without interruption. There is great strength in not needing to speak. It is not weakness to say nothing. It is not giving up. It is wisdom. It is the recognition that what is real does not need to be announced. It does not need to be validated in dialogue. It exists in its own right, quietly, steadily, with or without an audience. When you choose silence, you begin to sense what is truly yours. You begin to notice what thoughts belong to you, and which ones were planted by fear, by culture, by other people's voices. You begin to see how much of your identity has been shaped in reaction to others, and how little space you have given to your original nature. In silence, the mask drops, the performance ends, and what remains is something true, something eternal. This is not about isolation. It is about inner communion. The silence I speak of is not cold or distant. It is intimate. It is the space where your soul begins to speak in symbols, in images, in feelings that cannot be pinned down. And when you learn to be with these inner movements without rushing to explain them, you grow roots into the ground of your own being. There is a kind of healing that only happens when you are quiet. A healing that bypasses the mind entirely. It does not argue. It does not convince. It does not solve. It simply brings you home. When you fall into this silence, you realize you do not need to be understood to be whole. You do not need to translate your inner world into words for it to be valid. You do not need to prove anything to anyone, not even to yourself. This silence is not passive. It is fiercely alive. It is where your intuition grows. It is where your power returns, and it is where your energy, once scattered in trying to explain yourself, begins to return to you, piece by piece, breath by breath. When you find this place, something inside you changes. You stop seeking, you stop chasing, you stop needing others to confirm what you feel, because now you feel it directly. You don't have to say, "This is who I am." You just are. And that presence says more than words ever could. Let them misunderstand you, let them wonder, let them talk. You do not need to explain your silence. It is not emptiness, it is the beginning of everything. To choose yourself is to step into a kind of power that many fear, because it means no longer depending on others to reflect your worth back to you. It is the beginning of true psychological integration. You are not born fragmented. You become fragmented through the slow erosion of authenticity, by learning to please, to perform, to conform. And somewhere in that process, you start abandoning parts of yourself to gain approval, to feel safe, to avoid pain. But those lost parts do not disappear. They wait. They linger in the shadows, quietly longing for your return. Choosing yourself is the moment you stop looking outward to find the pieces that were never missing from the world, but only hidden within you. It is not a loud declaration. It is a silent, unwavering knowing. I will no longer betray myself to belong. That is the path of integration. That is the path of becoming whole. This choice does not come without resistance. The psyche has been trained to seek acceptance outside itself. It has been taught that to be lovable, you must be agreeable, that to be valued, you must be understood. But that is an illusion. The self you've tried to explain to others is often a version shaped for their comfort. And every time you edited yourself to be more digestible, more likable, more acceptable, you pushed away the parts of you that were real. To reclaim those parts, you must stop negotiating your existence. Stop trying to be palatable. Stop asking others to validate what your soul already knows. Every moment you choose yourself over the comfort of being understood by someone else, you bring a lost part of you back into the light. And that is what integration is, the gathering of all that was exiled in the name of acceptance. There is a quiet rebellion in this choice, a turning away from the external measures of identity. You no longer define yourself by how others see you. You no longer need to explain your wounds so someone else can tell you they're justified. You feel the wound, you stay with it, and in doing so, you carry yourself out of the past. No one else can do this for you. No one else can hand you back your wholeness. That is your work, and yet the world will not applaud you for it. It will resist your silence. It will ask why you've changed. It will demand explanations. But healing does not require explanation. It requires allegiance to your truth, to your boundaries, to your silence. Choosing yourself often looks like disappointing others. It looks like letting go of relationships that only loved the version of you that stayed small. It looks like not answering the message, not defending your decision, not making excuses. It is an act of spiritual maturity to walk away without resentment, to walk forward without guilt, to choose peace over pleasing. In this space where you stop explaining and start embodying, you begin to remember who you were before the world told you who to be. You see clearly, the need to be understood was never about connection. It was about survival. It was the child within trying to earn love, trying to be seen. But now, you are the one who sees. You are the one who holds. You are the one who chooses. You stop explaining yourself not because you're hiding, but because you're healing. And healing doesn't beg to be understood. It simply unfolds quietly, deeply, without performance. It is a return to essence. And when you choose yourself again and again, especially in the moments you are most tempted to abandon yourself, something sacred begins to take root within you. A calm, a clarity, a knowing that you are whole, not because others reflect it back to you, but because you have finally stopped arguing with your own worth. Choosing yourself is not a one-time act. It is a daily decision to meet yourself where you are and to stop waiting for the world to approve of the place you stand. You do not need to be validated to be real. You do not need to be understood to be whole. You do not need to be chosen to be worthy. The more you choose yourself, the less you need others to. The need to be liked, to be approved of, to be seen in a favorable light. This is not a sign of weakness, but of deep confusion within the psyche. It is the result of a misalignment that happens slowly, almost invisibly, across the course of one's life. At some point, the inner self becomes buried beneath the false self, the mask that was built not out of authenticity, but out of necessity. And with that mask comes a deep attachment to how others perceive you. Suddenly, you are no longer living for truth. You are living for image. You find yourself carefully curating what to say, how to act, how much of yourself to show. Not because it brings joy, but because you are afraid. Afraid of being rejected. Afraid of being misunderstood. Afraid of being alone. And this fear seduces the ego into a performance. The ego becomes addicted to the applause, to the nods of approval, to the fleeting reassurance that you are enough. If only you play the part. But what is the cost of this performance? The more you mold yourself to fit into the preferences of others, the further you drift from the ground of your own being. You begin to forget what is real and what is performance. You begin to confuse your image with your identity. And worse, you start to fear that if you stop explaining, if you stop performing, the love will disappear. So you explain again and again, not to connect, but to control, to manage how others see you, to manage how you feel about yourself. This is the ego's trap. It says, if they like me, I'm safe. If they understand me, I'm real. If they approve, I can rest. But that rest never comes, does it? Because the ego feeds on anxiety. It can never be full. The moment you satisfy one person's expectations, another appears. The moment you're understood by one, someone else misunderstands you, and you begin to spin in a cycle of self-doubt, always looking outward, always wondering, do they see me the way I want to be seen? The addiction to approval is so subtle, most don't even know they're living in it. But look closely. Ask yourself, how often do you alter your truth just slightly to make someone more comfortable? How often do you soften your boundaries so that others won't feel rejected? How often do you explain your decisions to those who never truly listened in the first place? The need to explain is not always rooted in clarity. It is often rooted in fear. You hope that if they understand your reasons, they'll forgive you. You believe that if they see your heart, they won't walk away. But true connection is not born from explanation. It is born from presence, and presence requires no justification. It simply is. When you stop explaining yourself, you begin to see the addiction for what it is, a coping mechanism born of an ego afraid to let go. And yet, when you do let go, when you allow someone to misunderstand you, when you choose silence over defense, something miraculous happens. You realize that your peace is not tied to someone else's perception. You begin to feel the difference between egoic fear and inner truth. One contracts, the other expands. One clings, the other lets go. One performs, the other simply exists. And this is the shift. You begin to move from ego into essence. You begin to realize that you do not need to explain yourself to be free. You do not need to be approved of to be whole. You do not need to be liked to be real. The true self does not fear misunderstanding. It remains grounded, unshaken, and still, not because it is arrogant, but because it has returned home. This does not mean you never speak. This does not mean you become cold or distant. It means your voice no longer comes from the wound. It comes from the center, from a place that is calm, deliberate, and free of the need to manipulate how you are seen. And in that place there is power, a quiet power, the kind that does not shout, the kind that does not beg, the kind that does not explain itself because it has nothing to prove. You are not here to be liked. You are here to be whole, and wholeness begins the moment you choose presence over performance. There is a certain point in one's journey where the ache becomes too loud to ignore, not because life has grown harsher, but because your inner voice has grown stronger. You feel it when you wake up and the weight of pretending has become unbearable. You sense it in conversations where your smile feels hollow, your explanations rehearsed. It's the quiet exhaustion of living disconnected from your truth, even when everything on the outside appears fine. And that exhaustion is not a weakness, it is a message, a signal. The psyche will whisper until it must scream. Eventually, you must ask yourself, what am I doing all this for? Who are you trying to convince with all your effort? Who are you trying to keep from leaving by constantly giving pieces of yourself away? The fear of abandonment is real, but there is a deeper fear underneath it, the fear of being fully seen and still being left. And so you explain and justify and soften your truth, hoping that if you are careful enough, small enough, agreeable enough, you will finally be safe. But safety bought through self-abandonment is not safety. It is bondage. You begin to build your identity not from your own soul, but from the reactions of others. And this is the path that slowly kills the self. It doesn't happen overnight. It happens in moments when you say yes while your heart screams no. It happens in conversations where you tell people what they want to hear instead of what's true for you. It happens every time you remain in places where your spirit feels small, because you're afraid of what might happen if you walk away. But healing does not begin in the presence of comfort. It begins in the fire of self-honesty. It begins when you choose not what pleases others, but what restores your integrity. And that choice always comes with consequences. People will not always understand your silence. They will feel your boundaries and call them distance. They will experience your withdrawal from explanation as rejection. But that is not your burden to carry. You do not owe others the sacrifice of your inner peace in order to maintain their comfort. There comes a time when you must let the illusion fall away, the illusion that you are responsible for how others interpret your truth. When you stop explaining yourself, you begin to reclaim that responsibility. You let people form their opinions. You let them carry their projections. You let them walk away if they must. And in that release, something sacred happens. You stop leaking energy into battles that were never yours to fight. Your healing accelerates the moment you stop trying to be understood by those who never truly saw you. This is not bitterness. This is liberation. You realize that some people were only meant to witness the version of you that needed validation. And when that part of you dies, so does the relationship that was built upon it. But let it die, let what no longer serves your growth fall away, because when it does, you create space, not just for peace, but for truth. And truth is what heals, not the version of it you dress up for others, but the raw, messy, unpolished truth that lives in your chest like fire. The truth that says, I am not here to be understood. I am here to be whole. That truth will not always make you popular. It will not always make you agreeable, but it will make you free. To stop explaining yourself is not to become closed. It is to become discerning. You begin to see that not every question deserves an answer. Not every invitation deserves a response. Not every opinion needs to be challenged. You save your energy for what matters. You stop pouring your soul into empty vessels hoping they'll hold your essence, and you return that energy back to yourself, to your body, your mind, your inner world, and slowly, quietly, something begins to shift. The ache becomes softer, the anxiety begins to ease, the urgency to explain dissolves, because now you are choosing you, not once, but again and again, in each moment where you could betray yourself for acceptance, and choose instead to stay with your truth. You are healing. You are not here to manage how others perceive your path. You are here to walk it. There comes a moment when silence becomes more than absence. It becomes presence. It becomes a choice not to escape, but to anchor. In that silence, something powerful happens. You stop chasing meaning in the outside world and begin listening to the deeper language of your own soul. No more explanations, no more pleading to be seen. Just the raw, quiet intimacy between you and yourself. It is in that stillness that healing begins, not as an event, but as a slow return. A return to the parts of you that were silenced in your efforts to be understood. A return to the places within that never needed justification in the first place. In the noise of trying to explain who you are, why you feel what you feel, or why you chose what you did, the real you gets lost. Not because you are inauthentic, but because words can only stretch so far before they become performance. And when you live performing, even subtly, you lose touch with what is yours. You begin shaping your thoughts around how others will receive them. You adjust your truth so it doesn't provoke discomfort. You speak to be accepted rather than to be whole, but wholeness does not come through explanation. It comes through embodiment. It comes when you stop turning yourself into a translation for others, and instead become fully fluent in the language of your own life. That language is not always verbal. Often, it is quiet. It is the silent knowing in your chest when you walk away from what no longer serves you. It is the breath you take before choosing not to defend your boundaries. It is the still gaze you hold when someone misunderstands you and you let them, not out of pride, but out of peace. Choosing yourself in silence is one of the hardest things you will ever do because the ego thrives on reaction. It wants to be right. It wants to be validated. It wants to be seen winning, but there is no peace in those victories. They come at the cost of your inner calm, and when you stop feeding that cycle, when you no longer require an audience to confirm your worth, you meet the parts of yourself that have been waiting to return home. You begin to realize that the people who demand explanations are often not seeking to understand you. They are seeking control, reassurance, or power. And when you stop explaining, you interrupt that transaction. You remove yourself from the loop of needing to earn your place. You are not here to negotiate your right to exist. You are not here to justify why your path looks different. You are here to live it quietly, firmly, with presence. And in that presence, you begin to witness the subtle return of your power, the kind that doesn't require defense, the kind that doesn't need to be liked, the kind that simply is. This is how healing unfolds, not loudly, not dramatically, but softly, through choice after choice where you return to yourself instead of to the world. Every time you choose silence over explanation, you teach your nervous system that it is safe to be misunderstood. You teach your inner child that you no longer need to perform to receive love. You teach your shadow that it no longer has to hide behind justification. You become whole, not because others finally understand you, but because you've stopped asking them to. And that is the deep work, not changing how the world sees you, but changing your need for it to see you at all. The less you explain, the more you feel. The less you defend, the more you discern. And in that discernment, you find clarity. You see who stands beside you in your silence, who stays when there is no performance, who hears you even when you do not speak. These are the mirrors you were meant to have, not the ones who only listen when you justify, but the ones who understand because they, too, have done the work to understand themselves, you begin to move differently in the world, more slowly, more deliberately. Not from fear, but from groundedness. You no longer rush to fill the silence with noise. You allow it to stretch, to hold you, to speak its truth. And you realize that silence is not empty. It is full. Full of wisdom, full of power, full of everything you tried to explain away. In choosing silence, you do not become smaller. You become rooted. You become clear. You begin to walk through life no longer seeking to be chosen, but to remain in integrity with yourself. And that is the quiet revolution. It doesn't look like fire. It looks like stillness. But in that stillness, something inside you finally exhales. Healing is not when the world finally understands you. Healing is when you no longer need it to. If this message stirred something deep within you, don't keep it to yourself. Share this with someone who's tired of explaining, someone who's ready to choose themselves. Like this video, subscribe for more soul-rooted insights, and let your silence speak louder than your explanations. Healing begins when you stop performing and start remembering who you truly are.